much saying a word that is understood in English, but to them, in their society, in the law society, they are at least claiming that they are under the understanding that everybody is speaking their own language. So when they say the word understand, they mean stand under. When they say the word person, they mean corporation. When they say the word drive, they mean engaging in commerce on the open waters of the road. And that's, I mean, it's pretty deceptive in a way. But really, the way that I even got into it, more or less, in the legal system was by looking into the law up in Canada. Surprisingly enough, that was actually how I got my start learning about law, and then that kind of translated down here into the United States because it's both common law and it works really the same, just with like a few little, tidbits here and there. But there's actually a lot of people up, and it's pretty aware country up there. I mean, Robert Menard, Winston Shrout, there's the Paradigm Group, and a personal friend of mine, Robert Paget, who's a sovereign individual, and he teaches about actual sovereignty, becoming a sovereign, or not even a citizen, a sovereign individual, to where you're not even a citizen of the supposed country that you're a part of. And the interesting, the really interesting part of that is he's found out that up there in Canada, which a lot of people have found out to date, but up there in Canada, Canada is a piece of paper. It really is. It's a corporation. The United States, in many ways, is a corporation. Excuse me. And to give just a little bit of a background on what I'm talking about, Canada right now has it's in a state of anarchy, and it's been in a state of anarchy since 1931. And many people have actually known about this, but it's not known to the general public, and the general public doesn't really want to, or seem to want to know about it, because there was this thing called, the Statute of Westminster, which was passed in 1931, and it cut off Canada's tie to the crown. And a major player in this was their Prime Minister, William Mackenzie King, which, interestingly enough, he has like a lot of deep connections with the Rockefeller family, actually worked under the Rockefellers in New York City, and he was deeply into the occult. So, I mean, right there, that raises an eyebrow. But from that moment on, in 1931, there had been no constitution up there in Canada. So they have this thing that's called the Constitution Act of Canada, but I always tell people, think about it. Where does an act come from? An act is a piece of legislation, and legislation comes from government. Government is created through a form of constitution from the people, but there was no constitution at the time. So that Constitution Act of Canada is a useless piece of paper because it's a legislation from a government that does not exist. And
why aren't they at each other's throats, killing one another if they just have anarchy up there in Canada?
Because of the illusion. And that's exactly what it is, because it's the illusion. And there have actually been people that have tried to speak out about this when they were trying to come up with a new flag for Canada. Somebody stood up, and William Mackenzie King was actually present at this meeting, but someone stood up and said, I think we have a far greater problem on our hand than finding out what our new flag should be. We're in a state of anarchy. We don't even have a government. And
well, let's pick this up on the other side. We're on another break.
Okay.
They come fast. It's Freezone with my guest, Ben Stewart. All right, the Constitution. It's an interesting monster there. A lot of people want to stand behind it and say that this is their rights outlined and this is what gives them their true freedom. And it's an interesting thing to combat. I spoke with Alex Jones trying to say, well, those were the good Freemasons. I get it. But Canada, now this was a completely different scenario. They had no constitution. There seemed to be a reigning anarchy, but no one seemed to notice until some people did, right? So yeah. What happened with this constitution in Canada?
Well, what really happened was it was from the Statute of Westminster in 1931, the Constitution was pretty much eliminated because all ties with what is known as Canada all ties to the crown were cut off. Now, what Canada is today, and I'll get into it a little bit more in a second, but what Canada is today is actually just a corporation, and it is a subsidiary corporation of the parent corporation called Her Majesty. And this is no joke. These are registered businesses that pay taxes. Canada is a subsidiary company to a parent company, like I said, called Her Majesty. So that right there becomes more apparent why you hear and read that line, Her Majesty, in all the legislative documents from up there in Canada. But in 1931, that was abolished. So the Constitution Act that is in place right now is really also illegitimate. It's not in effect, or it is in effect. It's called what they call de facto, which means illegitimate but in effect because there is no challenge to it. And that is also all the courts, the whole of the law society up there in Canada is de facto, illegitimate but in effect. And that essentially means that the only reason it exists because nobody knows that it is illegitimate and nobody challenges that authority. Nobody stops and asks, what authority do these people have over me? Is it constitutional? Is it maybe the law of nature? What is it? What is it that gives these people authority to impose any of these rules upon us? And the problem that typically I see most of the time is comfort. Like I said, the idea that freedom is comfort. People get into this comfort zone of thinking, well, as long as I still have food on my plate, as long as I still have clothes on my back, a roof over my head, I still have amusement parks to go to, I still have the theaters, I can somewhat do what I want within these constraints, then I'm free. And they don't really feel the need or the drive to question some of these things, such as, well, is it legitimate? Do these authority figures actually have a legitimate authority over me, or am I allowing myself to be a part of this game, really? And that's all it is. The whole of the legal system is just a game. And because of that, Canada, like the United States, is a corporation. So the reason I get into this kind of research, in the film at least, is look at how this resembles what the false ego has done in our lives to pretty much usurp power and authority over our lives. It's the same exact thing. It's very symbolic of the false ego. Now, the ego is a front, right? It's a mask. It's there to interface with other people and also protect us from invasion. There's a reason for it being there, but what would happen if we were to, say, put on a Halloween costume of Freddy Krueger and never take it off, and then eventually everybody else, including ourselves, starts to believe that that is our identity? Well, that's exactly what happened up there in Canada. Since there was no one else, there was no other form of government in existence, the old form of government, which is now illegitimate, is still in effect. The Corporation of Canada had its courts and legal system become the official legal system of Canada, even though there was no constitution. So it really was a form of coup d'etat. They just snuck in there, set up shop, and no one challenged them. So today, it has the illusion of being the official legal system of the country of Canada. And that's why I get into this, because all of this, everything that we talk about, the elite, the NWO, all of this, it really is an illusion. The power that is wielded over us is an illusion, and it's imposed because of our own incapacity for freedom, because of our own fears. And that's really why I get into the legal portion of the film. But just to finish up on Canada, oddly enough, speaking of what Canada actually is, as I said, it really is just a piece of paper. It is a corporation. But when you're speaking of Canada, you're actually speaking not of the land up there, not of the soil and the rocks and the trees, but you're talking about the lakes and the rivers and the oceans. You're only speaking about the water when you say Canada, because maritime admiralty law is the law of the water. Admiralty law governs commerce. Corporations deal only in commerce, and therefore that is why you need things like a passport claiming you to be a citizen of the Corporation of Canada to go from the Corporation of Canada to the Corporation of the United States. Doesn't anyone ever wonder why a human being can't just be born into this world and travel as he or she sees fit anywhere that he or she wants. I mean, that's what the Constitution, at least of the United States, says. It recognizes our right to free, unmolested travel. And as of now, since we are indoctrinated into this system, this legal system, and we have a person, this social security number, we have this birth certificate, we have our driver's licenses, all these things that we think represent us, the human being, but it actually forces us to represent a dead instrument, a corporation.